They told me I was losing my mind, that the house was making noises because I was old and confused. They had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. They wanted my house, the home I built with my own 2 hands for their mother. They got it. But they also got the ghosts I built into the walls, and I was just getting started. Every creak, every slam, every flicker was a message from a past they chose to forget. The confrontation I knew was coming finally arrived on a Tuesday. It happened right here, in my workshop, the one place that still felt entirely mine. The air smelled of cedar shavings and old varnish, a scent that had comforted me for 50 years. My son Jake and his wife Vanessa stood silhouetted in the doorway, blocking the afternoon light. They didn't come to see how I was. They came with the sterile chill of vultures circling a patient beast, their eyes scanning my life's work as if it were a collection of junk. "Dad, we need to talk," Jake started, his tone dripping with a practiced false sincerity he probably learned from a self-help podcast. Vanessa hovered behind him, her arms crossed, her lips a thin line of impatience. She was the one driving this, I knew. Jake was weak, a ship without a rudder, but Vanessa was a storm. She saw my home not as a place of memories, but as untapped capital for their next great venture, another one of their passion projects that never seemed to involve actual passion or work. Vanessa stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking on the concrete floor. "Alex," she said, using my first name as she always did, as if we were peers. "We've been thinking about your well-being. This big old house, all by yourself, and this workshop, it's frankly a safety hazard. We think it's time for a change. For your own good, of course." She gestured around at the tools my father had passed to me, the tools that had fed and clothed her husband his entire life, as if they were rusty bear traps. The demand when it came was as blunt as a hammer. "We want you to sign the house over to us," Jake said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It just makes sense. We can take care of you properly. You can have the basement apartment in our place. It's lovely, very modern. You won't have to worry about a thing." They spoke of my Maria's home, the house where every floorboard held a memory, as if it were a tired old car ready for the scrapyard. A simple asset transfer. I looked at them. My son, his face a mask of strained concern. His wife, her eyes gleaming with the cold fire of avarice. They saw an old man, a doddering fool who was a burden on their grand plans. They saw a signature, a deed, a stepping stone. They didn't see the man who taught Jake how to ride a bike on the lawn they planned to pave over. They didn't see the husband who held Maria's hand in the garden she adored, a garden Vanessa called a weed patch. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, an icy calm that extinguished the spark of rage. It was the same focus I got when measuring a difficult cut, a precision of thought that saw the whole project, start to finish. Maria's voice echoed in my memory, a gentle whisper from a year ago. "Be clever, my love, not loud. Anger is a saw that cuts crooked." She was right. A shouting match would get me nowhere. They were prepared for a fight. They were not prepared for my surrender. So I did something that completely disarmed them. I smiled, a slow, gentle smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I ran a hand over the worn handle of my favorite chisel, its smooth wood a familiar comfort. "You're right," I said, my voice soft. "It is a big house, and I am getting tired." The look of stunned relief that washed over their faces was almost comical. It was that easy. The old man had folded, just as they predicted. They had won. "Of course," Jake said, puffing up his chest. "It's for the best, Dad. We'll have the papers drawn up. You just focus on packing your things. Just the essentials. We'll handle the rest." By the rest, I knew he meant selling my tools, my lumber, my history, for pennies on the dollar. I simply nodded, the gears in my mind already turning, sketching out a new and far more intricate blueprint. The house was their project now, but I would be the architect of their experience within it. They left, victorious, and the silence they left behind in the workshop was heavy. I stood there for a long time, the smell of sawdust my only company. I looked at the photograph of Maria I kept on my workbench. She was smiling, her eyes full of the life they had shared. "I'm sorry it has come to this, my love," I whispered to her. But you taught me that a home is more than wood and nails. It has a heart, and sometimes its heart needs to be defended with a little bit of mischief. My plan began to form that night. It wasn't born of rage, but of a craftsman's pride. They wanted my house. They would get the house. But they would get the version I wanted to give them. A house with personality. A house with quirks. A house that remembered its true master. I pulled out my old drafting table, unrolling the original blueprints from 40 years ago. My handwriting, younger and bolder then, detailed every joist, every wire, every pipe. I knew its secrets better than my own. The core of my revenge would be frustration, not destruction. It had to be harmless, but maddeningly inconvenient. It needed to be deniable, a series of unfortunate events that would make them question their own sanity. I would use my skills not to build, but to subtly unbuild, to introduce a carefully calibrated chaos into the ordered world they sought to possess. It would be my final and greatest project in this house, a symphony of annoyances conducted by a ghost in the walls. The next morning, I called Frank. Frank and I came up together in the union. He was a master carpenter like me, but his real genius was in what he called fiddly bits. Intricate mechanisms, clockwork, and later, simple electronics. He was retired too, bored out of his skull, and loved a good prank more than anyone I knew. When I told him the situation, there was a long pause on the line, followed by a low chuckle. "Al," he said, "this sounds like the most fun I've had since we replaced the foreman's hard hat with a cottage." Frank came over that afternoon, his old truck rattling up the driveway. He looked over my initial sketches, his eyes gleaming with mischievous delight. False bottoms in the kitchen cabinets? Child's play. A stair that groans like a dying man, but only on Tuesdays at 3 a.m.? Now you're talking. He saw the genius in it immediately. It wasn't about breaking things. It was about making things work perfectly, but in the wrong way. We spent hours refining the ideas, our laughter echoing in the workshop for the first time in a year. We started in the master bedroom, the room they were most excited to claim. I took out the custom wardrobe I had built for Maria. Behind the cedar backing, there was a shallow space. Frank wired a small, battery-powered audio player to a motion sensor. We recorded a faint, almost imperceptible sound of a woman humming a lullaby, Maria's favorite one. It would only trigger when the room was dark and still for more than an hour, a gentle nocturnal whisper to rob them of their sleep. Next, the kitchen. Vanessa had always complained about my ancient oak cabinets. I spent a day meticulously crafting false bottoms for every single one. They were perfectly seamless. Anything placed inside, a pot, a stack of plates, would slide gently into a hidden compartment below. They wouldn't be lost forever, just temporarily misplaced. They would live in a constant state of believing they were losing their possessions and their minds, one dish at a time. My masterpiece, however, was the plumbing. I showed Frank a secondary water valve I had installed years ago, hidden behind a false panel in the basement. It allowed me to shut off water to specific rooms for repairs. Frank, the genius, rigged it to a simple radio receiver. From a small remote I could keep in my workshop, I could now shut off the water to the upstairs shower. I imagined Vanessa, mid-lather with her expensive shampoo, suddenly left high and dry. The thought made me smile. Jake and Vanessa gave me 2 weeks to pack. They would call periodically, their voices a cloying mix of pity and impatience. "How are you holding up, Dad? Need any help getting rid of all that stuff?" Each call was a fresh log on the fire of my resolve. I played the part of the confused, grieving old man perfectly. I told them I was making slow progress, that it was hard to let go of so many memories. They ate it up, their condescension a shield against seeing what I was truly doing. The pressure escalated a week before the move. Vanessa called, her voice sharp and devoid of its usual fake sweetness. "Alex, we had a call from a concerned neighbor. They said you were up on a ladder, talking to yourself. We're worried you're becoming a danger. If you can't manage this move yourself, we may have to get adult protective services involved to expedite the process for your own safety." It was a vile threat, a new low I hadn't anticipated. The concerned neighbor was, of course, her. The threat, meant to scare me into submission, only clarified my purpose. They weren't just taking my house. They were trying to strip me of my dignity, my agency. They wanted to turn me into a child. My calm response seemed to infuriate Vanessa further. "Oh, my dear," I said, my voice trembling slightly for effect. "I was just securing a loose shingle. The wind makes such a racket. I wouldn't want the new owners to be bothered by it. I am trying my best, I promise." Frank and I worked faster after that. We tackled the grand staircase, using a series of carefully placed tension springs and wooden wedges inside the stairwell. We rigged the seventh step. Normally, it was solid as a rock. But flick the hidden switch in the hall closet, and it would emit a deafening, soul-shaking creak when stepped on. Flick the switch again, and it would be silent. It was the perfect intermittent haunt, impossible to replicate for a handyman or inspector. We worked on the doors next. I loved my solid oak doors, the weight of them, the satisfying click of the latch. I replaced the standard latch plates with magnetic locks Frank had ordered from a specialty store. They were wired into the walls, completely invisible. With my remote, I could prevent a door from being opened, not locked in the traditional sense, just stuck, as if the house itself were refusing entry. It would feel like trying to push against an invisible wall. The living room fireplace, one I built from river stone with my own hands, was another target. Vanessa had mentioned wanting to convert it to a gas insert, an insult to the craft. Behind a loose stone on the hearth, a stone no one would ever think to check, we installed a small device that would, on command, create a backdraft, pushing a small, harmless puff of soot back into the room, just enough to make a mess and create a lingering smell of old smoke. Throughout this process, I began to feel a strange sense of liberation. For the past year, since Maria passed, I had felt like a ghost in my own home, rattling around with memories. Now, I was a ghost with a purpose. I was embedding my spirit, my mischief, and my anger into the very structure they coveted. The house was becoming an extension of my will, a silent accomplice in my quest for a very particular kind of justice. Maria would have disapproved of the anger, but I think she would have admired the craftsmanship. And there was one more secret, one final piece of the puzzle that even Frank didn't know about. It was my trump card, the piece of information that would transform my series of pranks into a checkmate. It lay in a dusty box in the attic, a file of old papers Maria had insisted we keep. It concerned the land itself, a covenant in the original deed that my son and his clever wife had entirely overlooked in their greedy rush to check property values. As moving day approached, I packed my few essential belongings into my old truck. My tools, my photos of Maria, a few changes of clothes, and my drafting pencils. Jake and Vanessa sent a moving company to handle the furniture. They want it all, the movers told me. The couple said not to let you take anything of value. I just smiled and pointed them inside. Let them have the furniture. It was the house I was interested in, and what I had hidden within it. On the final day, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The house felt quiet, expectant. It felt like a perfectly tuned instrument, waiting for the conductor's signal. I ran my hand along the walls, a silent goodbye to the life I had lived here. But it was not an end, it was a transition. I was handing my home over to its new caretakers. I just hadn't provided them with a complete owner's manual. They would have to learn its quirks the hard way. The handover was a sterile affair at a lawyer's office. Jake and Vanessa were beaming, barely containing their excitement. I played my part, the sad old man signing away his life. I endorsed the papers with a slightly shaky hand, pushing the deed across the polished table. "It's yours now," I said, my voice thick with false emotion. "Take good care of her." Vanessa gave my arm a patronizing pat. "Don't you worry, Alex. She's in good hands now. We're going to bring her into the 21st century." They didn't want me to come back to the house. They said it would be too emotional for me. They would drop off the key to their basement apartment later in the week. Perfect. This gave me the time I needed. I didn't drive to a lonely motel. Instead, I drove out of town to a small 2-acre plot of land I had bought with my union pension payout 10 years ago, a secret I had kept from everyone. It was a beautiful spot, nestled among pine trees with a view of a small lake. For years, Maria and I had planned to build a small cottage here, a final, simpler home for just the two of us. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to do it. The grief was a heavy blanket. But now, a new energy coursed through my veins. I parked my truck, pulled out my plans, and began to measure the foundation. I was a carpenter. Building was what I did. I had unbuilt a home for my son. Now, I would build a new one for myself. A week later, the first frantic call came. It was Jake. "Dad, something weird is going on with the house. The TV keeps changing channels by itself." I feigned confusion. "Oh? That's strange, son. Maybe it's a problem with the remote. Have you checked the batteries?" He crumbled and hung up. I smiled. Frank had helped me install a cheap, universal remote transmitter in the attic, aimed at the living room. It was on a random timer, a small, simple annoyance. The overture was complete. The symphony was about to begin. The next call was from Vanessa, 2 days after that. Her voice was shrill. "Alex, all of my new kitchen knives are gone. The ones I just bought. They were in the drawer this morning, and now they're just gone." I could hear the panic in her voice. I feigned a gentle, concerned tone. "Oh dear, that is worrying. Are you sure you know where you put them? Sometimes we misplace things when we're stressed from a move." I could almost hear her teeth grinding over the phone before she hung up on me. Her precious knives were, of course, resting safely in the false bottom of the very drawer she was staring at. This was the beauty of my plan. Each incident was small, isolated, and utterly baffling. It was the kind of problem you couldn't call a repairman for. What would they say? My house is mildly inconvenient. My things are not where I left them. They would sound, for lack of a better word, crazy. And the seeds of doubt, once planted in the fertile soil of their entitlement, were beginning to sprout. Frank called me that evening, laughing so hard he could barely speak. He'd driven by the old house and seen a high-tech security van in the driveway. "They're getting cameras, Al. They think they have a burglar who only steals spatulas and changes the channel to old westerns." We laughed together, two old craftsmen enjoying the fruits of their labor. The real beauty was that no camera could ever catch the culprit. The culprit was the house itself. The true showdown was still to come. I knew they would eventually break and demand I come over to witness their madness or to blame me for it. I was ready. I had my remote control, my final, devastating piece of information, and a quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I was out on my own land, the frame of my new little home writhing around me. A testament to a life built, not taken. They thought they had trapped me, but I was freer than I had ever been. The first major crack in their composure appeared on a Thursday. I got a hysterical call from Jake. Vanessa had been in the shower, he stammered, and the water just stopped completely. She was covered in conditioner. By the time he figured out how to turn the main back on, she was shivering and furious. I made sympathetic noises while privately picturing the scene with immense satisfaction. My remote, tucked safely in my pocket, felt warm. Then came the humming. This was the part I had designed just for my son. In the dead of night, the small speaker in the wardrobe would begin its ghostly lullaby. It was the song Maria used to sing to him when he had nightmares as a boy. It was too faint for Vanessa to hear clearly from her side of the bed, but for Jake, it was a tormenting whisper from a memory he had long since betrayed. His guilt was becoming his own personal phantom. They spent a fortune. They brought in plumbers who found no leaks, electricians who found no shorts. They even hired a team of paranormal investigators, a detail Frank shared with me that sent us into a fit of wheezing laughter. The investigators found unsettling energy signatures and charged them $5,000 for a spiritual cleansing, which, of course, did absolutely nothing. Their dream house was bleeding them dry, one phantom at a time. Their breaking point, as I knew it would be, was born of vanity. To prove to their friends and themselves that everything was perfect, they decided to host a lavish housewarming party. It was to be their grand unveiling, a celebration of their new status. They sent me a pity invitation, a digital card that said, "We know it's hard for you, but we'd love for you to see how we've brightened up the old place." It was the signal I had been waiting for. On the night of the party, I drove my old truck to a wooded spot with a clear view of the house. It was ablaze with light, fancy cars lining the driveway. Music drifted on the air. From my dashboard, I laid out my arsenal: the remote for the plumbing and locks, the transmitter for the TV, and the controller for the staircase. I was the conductor, and my masterpiece of chaos was about to begin. I took a deep breath and pressed the first button. Inside, as their guests mingled with glasses of champagne, the lights in the living room began to flicker. Just for a moment, a nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Jake, ever the smooth host, blamed it on the old wiring. Then, as a well-dressed woman went to the kitchen for a napkin, she opened a drawer, and her hand came back empty. She tried again. The entire stack of napkins she had seen moments before had vanished. Confusion began to cloud the festive atmosphere. The main event was the staircase. Vanessa's boss, a man they were desperate to impress, started up the stairs to use the guest bathroom. As his foot landed on the 7th step, the sound I had so carefully engineered erupted through the house. It was not a creak. It was a groan of biblical proportions, a sound of tortured timber and dying souls that silenced every conversation. The man leaped back as if bitten. The house was no longer just quirky. It was hostile. As if on cue, the fireplace chose that moment to exhale its puff of soot, dusting a nearby white sofa and several guests with a fine gray powder. A woman shrieked. The party was officially over. But I had one last trick. As people scrambled to leave, the front door, my magnetically locked pride and joy, refused to open. For a full 60 seconds, their guests were trapped, a rising tide of panic, turning their party into a hostage situation. A phone call came an hour later. It wasn't a call, it was a summons. Jake's voice was a ragged shriek of pure fury. "Get over here. Now." He didn't have to say another word. The time for games was over. I started my truck and drove toward the house, my heart beating with a slow, steady rhythm. The final act was about to begin, not in the shadows, but center stage, under the flickering lights of the home they thought they owned. I walked in without knocking. The front door was ajar. The house was a wreck, littered with half-empty glasses and plates of food. Jake and Vanessa stood in the middle of the living room, their faces pale with exhaustion and rage. Vanessa's expensive dress was smudged with soot. "This house is a nightmare," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Everything is broken. You sold us a collapsing, haunted piece of junk. You did this to us." I looked around the room, a placid expression on my face. "Broken?" I said softly. "No, I don't think so. I think it works perfectly." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small remote. I aimed it at the grand staircase. "Tell me, Jake, does the 7th step always make that noise?" I asked. Before he could answer, I pressed the button. Then I walked over and stomped on a step. Silence. I pressed it again and asked him to try. The unholy groan echoed around us. Their faces wed from rage to utter slack-jawed disbelief. "It was you," Jake whispered, the blood draining from his face. "The water? The humming? The doors? All of it?" I gave a simple nod. "The house doesn't have ghosts, son. It just has memories. And a very good security system. One that responds to disrespect. I designed it myself. I called it the Ungrateful Child Package. It comes with a few special features, but that's just the fun part," I continued, my voice calm and even. "The part to keep you occupied. The real issue isn't in the walls. It's in the paperwork. The kind of tedious paperwork that people who are blinded by greed tend to overlook." I pulled a folded yellow document from my jacket pocket and laid it on the soot-stained coffee table. It was a copy of the original land grant for the property, from when my grandfather first built here. You see, this land was part of a conservation trust, I explained. My grandfather was the caretaker. The deed has a covenant, a permanent one. It stipulates that the property can never be subdivided, used for commercial purposes, or have its original footprint altered by more than 10%. It's for a single family, and that's it, forever. You plans to tear it down and build those 3 ghastly mortar boxes? They are, and always were, a fantasy. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise the house could make. Vanessa sank onto the sofa as if her bones had dissolved. All her schemes, her dreams of being a developer, of flipping my life's work for a massive profit, all turned to dust. The house wasn't an asset. It was a cage, a beautiful, unsellable, maddening cage. They were trapped, not by ghosts, but by their own lazy, entitled avarice. They hadn't done their homework. Vanessa finally broke. She turned on Jake, her face a mask of fury. You told me it was clear. You told me you checked. Her words were venomous, stripping away years of false affection. Jake, for his part, just stared at me, his expression that of a lost child. He hadn't just lost the house. He had lost the foundation of his entire world, built as it was on the quicksand of his own entitlement. I had not only taken his future, I had shown him the truth of his past. I left them to their wreckage. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. My plan was complete. As I walked out the front door, I pressed a final button on my remote. Every light in the house went out, plunging them into the darkness they had so richly earned. I didn't look back. My work in that house was finally truly done. Justice, like carpentry, is best served with precision and patience. In the following months, I focused on my new life. The small cottage on my hidden plot of land took shape under my skilled hands. Frank would come by to help, and we'd sit by a fire in the evenings, sipping whiskey and laughing about the ghosts on the old hill. I heard through the town grapevine that Jake and Vanessa had put the house on the market. The price kept dropping, week after week. No one wanted a house with such a bizarre reputation and ironclad restrictions. Eventually, they sold it for less than half of what they thought it was worth, just to escape. They lost my inheritance and a good portion of their own money in the fiasco. The buyers were a young couple, musicians, who loved the house's quirks and had no intention of ever changing it. They told the real estate agent they thought the odd noises and stuck doors gated character. I felt Maria would have liked them. The house had found its rightful stewards. The fallout was severe for Jake and Vanessa. Their lavish lifestyle collapsed. They had to move into a tiny rental apartment across town. The constant stress and finger-pointing finally shattered their already fragile marriage. Last I heard, Vanessa had left him, moving back in with her parents. Jake was working a menial job, his passion projects a bitter joke. He was finally learning the value of $1, the hard way. One day my phone rang. It was Jake. His voice was quiet, humbled. He didn't apologize, not in words. But he asked me a question. He asked how I built the magnetic lock system for the doors, how I wired it to be invisible. It was the first time in his adult life he had ever shown genuine interest in my craft. I explained the mechanics to him, a simple conversation between a father and a son about how to build something instead of how to take it. My new life is a quiet one. My cottage is finished, a monument not to revenge, but to resilience. The morning sun streams through the windows, and the only sounds are the birds and the lapping of the lake. I have my workshop, smaller than the old one, but just as full of purpose. I am not haunted by the past. I am comforted by it. I am a builder. I tore one thing down to its foundations, but I have built something new and stronger in its place. My own peace. Family, I've learned, is not an obligation. It is a structure, built on mutual respect and shared effort. When the foundations are rotten, the whole thing is bound to collapse. I mourned the loss of my son long before I took his house from him. What I did was simply tear down the condemned structure, forcing him to see the ruins he had made. Whether he chooses to build something new from them is up to him now. Sometimes a young boy from the family down the lane comes to visit. He watches me work. his eyes wide with wonder as a piece of wood takes shape in my hands. He asks questions, real questions. I'm teaching him how to make a simple birdhouse, passing on the knowledge, the craft, to a mind eager to learn. A connection built on shared creation, not entitled expectation. It is a gift freely given and gratefully received. My revenge was never about hate. It was about teaching a lesson in value. They saw a house as a pile of money. I had to teach them it had a soul. They saw me as a relic to be managed. I had to teach them that the oldest tools are often the sharpest. They saw family as a bank to be withdrawn from. I had to teach them that its accounts required deposits of love and respect, or you end up bankrupt. My little cottage is filled with light and the smell of fresh-cut pine. It holds everything I need and nothing I don't. I have my memories of Maria, her smiling photograph on my workbench, a constant guiding presence. I have my craft, my dignity, and a quiet lake that stretches out before me like a promise. I am not an old man in a basement. I am a king in a castle I built with my own 2 hands. I often wonder if Jake will ever truly understand, not just the mechanics of the prank, but the reason behind it. I hope one day he realizes that the strongest things a man can build are not houses or investment portfolios, but character and integrity. That is a lesson that cannot be inherited. It must be hammered out day by day in the workshop of your own soul. Perhaps his collapse was the first step in his own reconstruction. The wind rustles the pine trees outside my window. It sounds a bit like a gentle humming, a lullaby from the world itself. But this time, it brings no guilt, no sorrow. It is a sound of peace. My tools are clean. My plans are drawn for a new rocking chair. And the sun is setting, painting the water in hues of orange and gold. My story had a bitter chapter, but the ending is one of my own design. They tried to write the end of my story, to confine me to an epilogue in their basement. They forgot that I was the one who taught them how to hold a pencil. I simply took the pen back and wrote a better ending for myself, one where the old man doesn't fade away, but builds himself a new beginning, board by board, nail by nail, with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. I pick up the photo of Maria. Her smile seems to approve. "Well, my love," I whisper to her, "the new place is finished. It's small, but it's sturdy, and the view is something else. I think you would have loved it, and I think, just maybe, you would have gotten a good chuckle out of the fiddly bits I installed back at the old house. A very good chuckle indeed." And as I sit there, in the quiet of my own making, I smile too. A real one this time. A peaceful one. The legacy I leave behind will be a house or a bank account. It will be the birdhouses I build with the neighbor's boy, the memory of a lesson taught. And this little cottage, a testament to the fact that it is never too late to build your own happiness, especially if someone tries to take it from you. You just have to be willing to get your hands dirty, and maybe, just maybe, rig a few things to go bump in the night. They called me old. They called me weak. They called me confused. They learned that old wood is the hardest, that quiet wills are the strongest, and that a carpenter knows every stress point in the house, both the one made of timber and the one made of family. They wanted my house, but they never understood what a home was. I had to teach them the difference, and the lesson was costly. But their tuition is finally paid in full. As darkness falls over the lake, I switch on a small lamp I made from a piece of driftwood. It casts a warm glow over my workbench. The tools are all in their place, silent and waiting. There's always more to build, more to create. My son wanted to put me in a basement, to file me away. He didn't realize that in a workshop, the master plans are always kept on the top shelf, right in plain sight, for anyone with the respect to look. So here I am, a retired carpenter in a house he built, on land he owns, living a life he reclaimed. The ghosts of the past are at peace, and the phantoms I created have done their job and moved on. There is only the quiet hum of a life well lived, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that when they pushed me, they didn't push me over. They just pushed me into building something better and leaving them to the collapsing house they deserved. The final nail has been driven, the sawdust has settled, and the craftsman rests, not because the work is over, but because this particular project, this intricate piece of retributive justice, is finally complete. And it is a beautiful thing to behold. A masterpiece, if I do say so myself. And I do. I truly do. The house is quiet now, both of them. And so am I, at last.